First and foremost, I want to say, this is what I've been thinking with Marcus Cage, a conversation with Carl Zaw, part three. This is going to be a brief one, but don't worry, Carl will be back on more and more conversations. So, how are we doing this morning over there with you, Carl?
Yeah, we're now it's 10 o'clock in the morning in beautiful Ubu, Bali. Our family decided to take a little staycation on the island, so we're just exploring this part of this beautiful island right now.
And it is a beautiful island from all the pictures I see. More of my focus tends to be kind of on what's going on with all of these other issues that are going to happen as far as ramifications of nuclear war and possibilities of nuclear war and things like that, or just war in general. The whole China Taiwan thing, I feel, is a lot more of a pressing issue right now. And so what are your thoughts on the whole Pelosi visit and like a lot of the different things that have been going on as far as the war games and also that's right, we haven't talked since the assassination of Shinzo Abe, and so how all of these things all work together in this whole narrative.
It's a good point. Shinzo Abe, of course, is a right-wing Japanese politician. But I remember someone said on Twitter, says, you think Shinzo Abe is bad. You should see the alternatives. Unfortunately, that's where Japan is right now politically. Like we're getting rid of one right-wing politician. The replacement just worse. And especially Japan is also on a similar trajectory as US. Like the economy is moribund, the youth doesn't have much future aspect, so the politician is kind of ramping up tensions, geopolitical tensions, to get votes, and because to do that, they don't actually have to do anything to actually build the country, to improve the economy. They just says we're here to defend our country. You can't argue with that. So that's Japan. But Pelosi, first of all, a lot of the rhetorics in U.S. about the Pelosi visit is just reminds me of like 1984. The war is peace. It's everything is inverted because the White House spokesperson Kirby has said, China is overreacting to this long-standing U.S. policy of having diplomatic relation with Taiwan, which is completely untrue because the last time a Speaker of the House visited Taiwan was in 1997. That was 25 years ago. That was Newt Gingrich, and again, this is a big deal because Nancy Pelosi is a second in line to succeed as a U.S. president, just in case something happened. If something happened to both Biden and Kamala Harris on the same day, then Pelosi will be our president.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
She did not flew on either a private jet or commercial airline like the past.
Yeah, she flew on a military transport on Air Force plane.
Yes, she flew on the U.S. Air Force C-40C. She went in first as in her capacity as a Speaker of the House, third highest ranking member of the administration, and then she went on the U.S. Air Force jet. And in however you cut it, that is a violation of the Chinese sovereignty, because the U.S.-China relationship today, the basis for that was 1972 Shanghai Communique, when Nixon went over and he met with the Chinese premier Zhou Enlai in Shanghai. They signed a joint communique. It's called Shanghai Communique, which says United States recognize the Taiwan issue is an issue remain to be resolved by Chinese people on the both side of the Taiwan Strait. In other words, U.S. recognize Taiwan issue is a leftover from the Chinese Civil War. It's an issue for the Chinese themselves to resolve peacefully among themselves. It's not something that U.S. would interfere. So with that guarantee, that formed the basis for the future Sino-American relationship. And then in 1979, U.S.-China normalized relationship. The U.S. moved its embassy out of Taipei, move its embassy to Beijing. So because for people have to realize, the Taiwan issue is really a holdover from the Chinese Civil War. In
Yeah.
1950, Taiwan itself, it was part of China until 1895 when Japan defeated China in the First Sino-Japanese War. And so Japan, then Taiwan became a Japanese colony for 50 years until end of World War II. And as part of the World War II settlement, Japan is supposed to give up all its former colonies, including Taiwan. So Taiwan was returned to China after August 1945. But what happened in China was after the Japanese surrender, the civil war broke out between the communists and the KMT government, and eventually the communists won. And the KMT government under Chiang Kai-shek, they fled to Taiwan. And then in 1950, when Mao was about to send the People's Liberation Army to cross the Taiwan Strait and to finally liberate Taiwan, in June 1950, the Korean War broke out. And Truman decided to unilaterally send the U.S. 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Strait, which effectively prevented the People's Liberation Army from crossover, because in 1950, China, People's Republic of China didn't have a navy or air force. There's nothing they could do when U.S. aircraft carriers sailed into the Taiwan Strait in 1950. So this actually predated Chinese intervention in the Korean War. The U.S. took an action to interfere in the Chinese Civil War, and that led to later Mao sending the troops he would otherwise only send to Taiwan and send them to Korea instead to fight the Americans. So this was the history. And then for about 20 years after that, U.S. worked under this fiction that somehow Chiang Kai-shek's government on Taiwan represent the whole China. And, Chiang Kai-shek still held the China's UN seat for 20 years until Nixon visit to China. So Nixon visit to China was really the pivot. And that's when U.S. changed its policy, switched recognition to Beijing. And in on the State Department website, they have a whole page on the Sino-American relationship for the last 100 years. And there's an entry for 1978. It says both sides agreed to normalize relationship, and United States confirmed that Taiwan is part of China. So that is like the precondition for the two sides to have a diplomatic tie like we have today. And what U.S. have done in the past few years is starting to walk back from that position. It started with, so first of all, right in 1970s, there was already, in 1950s, there were already two Taiwan Strait crises in 1954 and 1958. During both those crises that when it looks like Mao's People's Liberation Army was about to seize a couple offshore islands, not even Taiwan, just offshore islands, few kilometers off the mainland coast, U.S. Pentagon had plans to drop nuclear bombs on mainland China to stop.
Yeah, I read about that.
Yes, this only came out a couple of years ago, the plan, but the plan didn't get carried out because in the end, Mao did not send the PLA over, but even so, since 1958, U.S. has stationed nuclear weapons and nuclear-tipped missiles in Taiwan, pointing at mainland China. U.S. stationed 30,000 troops in Taiwan, and during Vietnam War, Taiwan basically became a little playground for U.S. Soldiers from Vietnam on R&R. Over 60,000 U.S. servicemen rotated through Taiwan. This only changed in 1972 after Nixon visited China. So U.S. pulled out its military from Taiwan. It's pulled out its nukes, pulled out its nuclear missiles. And what has happened since Hillary Clinton's pivot to Asia in 2012 is U.S. is now trying to slowly walk back from that position. They're aside from like keep on selling billions of dollars worth of weapons to Taiwan. Many U.S. congressmen visit, but never Speaker of House. And there has been no
it's
Speaker
been
of House.
25 years, since
Yeah,
it was Newt Gingrich was the last one.
And under Trump administration, U.S. for the first time since 1970s sent U.S. Marines to Taiwan under the pretense that the U.S. Institute on Taiwan, which serve as a de facto embassy, because there's no official embassy because U.S. don't recognize Taiwan, so they have this.
Well, technically, officially they do, but in practice they don't, because they still recognize. I'm talking about China, the one China policy. So they recognize it as all being China, right, but they act as if it's different. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I was misunderstanding you. I wanted to throw something out to the chat real quick too. I've already asked Carl about TPP, and you can look and Google. TPP is no longer policy, and he's already talked about that China has applied for the the TT investment thing. So he's answered that question. So let's go on. But I was wondering something about, because I've read this, and this has been a theory of mine. Part of the Pelosi visit is about the semiconductors. What do you say about that aspect of that's part of why her visit?
Yeah, so interesting, because this is more important to United States than it is to China, because China is fine buying semiconductors from Taiwan. It has done so for past several decades, because Taiwan semiconductors produce like the majority of the world's supply of semiconductor chips, especially the more cutting edge 7 nanometer and less. I think that they recently came out with 5 nanometer chips in TSMC in Taiwan. So for United States, the supply of semiconductors from Taiwan is very important. What U.S. has done in the last few years is they are trying to bring back the semiconductor production back to United States. What they did is it forced the TSMC to essentially divulge their trade secret, and then offer to have TSMC open a plant, I think in Arizona, to start manufacturing semiconductor in U.S. So that way, in case that Taiwan gets reunified with mainland China, U.S. will have its semiconductors onshore in U.S. So that's part of the U.S. plan. And Nancy Pelosi herself, let's keep in mind, she and her husband, we all know about her stock manipulation, but they also invested heavily in the semiconductor industry.
Yeah, and Pelosi, part of them getting in trouble a few months back. I can't remember the name of the company. My friend buddy Franco covered it, and I can't remember the name of it for now. It starts with an N, but they got in trouble for those stock tips.
And for Pelosi herself, what a better way to distract the public from looking further into their stock manipulation than carrying out this highly provocative trip that could potentially trigger World War III. When everybody's worrying about World War III, they don't worry about Nancy Pelosi and her husband's stock manipulation anymore. They forget about the insider trading part. In a way, this Nancy Pelosi's visit, again, it's just symbolic. It's symbolic visit. Does it actually do anything either for Taiwan?
I honestly think that it's for provocation.
No, totally. I mean,
I think it's intentionally, because they're fighting over the semiconductor market, and the U.S. know that they can't build their own semiconductors because they don't have all the raw materials, so they want to capitalize on the area which is producing most of them.
Well, Nancy Pelosi's stated reason is to offer support to Taiwan. But realistically, what kind of support did she offer to Taiwan other than this very just highly symbolic photo ops? I mean, Taiwan's position vis-a-vis China did not change just because of Pelosi visit. I mean,
Yeah.
in fact, after Pelosi left, China carried out a military exercise all around the Taiwan island, and U.S. didn't do peep about that. So,
Well,
in
and
that,
this has been going on back to when Australia was complaining and wanting to do more because they were worried about China in the region.
so again, like what Pelosi has done by her visit, it's all symbolic. It's a chance for her to raise her own personal profile, and it's also close to U.S. midterms, right? So she's probably thinking about her own donors, Democratic donors, who are trying to get. And I think also Democrats are under this kind of mistaken notion that somehow they can out hawk the Republicans, so they can get a slice of the hawkish base, a voter base. I don't see that their strategy going to succeed.
I would honestly kind of say that this isn't even so much Pelosi. I would say this is more Biden, because Biden has always been more of a hawkish type mentality, and he can't outright do it himself because that would have been really grievous. And so he decides, well, let me send Pelosi out there to do it instead. I want you to weigh in on that, and then I got a question for you too from Denver over here on Rockfin. Denver said, where does the International Bank of Settlements weigh in on the new board? It was supreme under TPP. Does it have a role in China's vision or trajectory?
I'm sorry, the international ruling on what?
Let's see, what was it? International Bank of Settlements.
Okay. Again, the TPP right now, when it comes to China, it's all theoretical. China is not a member of TPP. China.
Well, Trump pulled out of it in 2017. So I mean, regardless, whatever it is, it's not in effect.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no partnership.
U.S. is not part of it. China is not part of it. China
and the US
applied
are
for
not
membership.
partnered. They're not partnered with us, but for some reason, there's a couple of people in our chat where this is like literally one of their most important issues. Where I'm honestly worried more about World War III, because World War III, I think, trumps any trade deal, because there's going to be no trading, and there's going to actually be lives being literally lost, and also possibly war between multiple nuclear parties. I mean, right now we literally got the China U.S. Taiwan situation. We have the U.S. Russia Ukraine situation. We have the Israel and Iran situation with the U.S. involved in that. I mean, so I'm looking, and then not to mention North Korea is also, in the background also doing a lot more tests. And then I just heard recently that North Korea is volunteering up to 100,000 troops to Ukraine to go and fight for Russia. And
U.S. has managed to unite the most diverse coalition, from Russia to Iran to China to North Korea. These countries spread all across the Eurasian continent, have very different political ideologies, have very different domestic issues, but U.S. managed to unite them all into one coalition, all through U.S. foreign policy. So kudos to that.
Yeah.
And right now, your thing about Biden, I think is correct, because officially on the surface, Biden protests that United States cannot, as head of the U.S. administration, he cannot control where the congressman or congresswoman may or may not want to go. But this is false, patently false, because as I mentioned before, Pelosi did not travel on a private jet. She did not travel on a commercial airliner. She traveled on United States Air Force Boeing C-40C. So Biden is the commander-in-chief. All he could said is, sorry, you can't travel on U.S. Air Force asset. You have to take a commercial airline or a private jet like all other congressmen, right? The fact that and the fact that Pentagon provided fighter escort for Pelosi's plane into Taiwan, and they had the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan sailing through South China Sea all around Taiwan to offer support. that does not seem an individual decision by Pelosi. I mean, it's far from it. Far from like a isolated one crazy congresswoman's trip, unplanned.
Yeah, that's
Trip.
why
This
I
is
don't. That's why I don't believe it was Pelosi's sole doing.
Yeah, I mean they have to make some kind of pretense, like no, it's Biden. No, I really respect one China policy. It's just Pelosi's her own personal decision. Then why did she travel on U.S. Air Force jet? Why did the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy provided a freaking armed escort for her trip? I mean, so this is Chinese is not buying that, of course. Chinese just think either Biden is lying or Biden is so weak that he has absolutely no control over the situation. I mean,
Well, a combination of both. Politically, Biden is very weak right now, but Biden still has goals, which he's always. I mean, look at his career. Biden has always been a very hawkish type senator and hawkish as a vice president. So it makes sense that he will follow that same logic now that he's supposedly the top man. And I don't see any of that changing, especially when you look at both sides of the aisle, the Democratic and Republican Party, both are more hawkish together combined than I've seen in a long time.
Yeah. And right now, at least when it comes to Russia, there's sort of a split where the Democrats are more gung-ho on going after Russia, whereas some Republicans are like, wait a minute, maybe this is not our issue to deal with. But on China, it's a bipartisan issue. Both Democrats and the Republicans, they're trying to outdo each other to see who is tougher on China. We are tougher than these other guys. It's the other guys trying to sell out to China. And so right now we have this really weird political dynamic going on in United States. But if you really think about it, in terms of impacting average American lives, China doesn't really factor that. China doesn't really factor. I mean, what does China and Taiwan issue? How does that even factor to average Americans? Trying to make a living today. In the aftermath of pandemic and the great financial recession since 2008, which we never really recover from, right? But again, for politicians in a liberal democracy, it's always easier to shift blames, to blame the bad China than actually investing in our own infrastructure, investing in our own education, our own healthcare. So these are hard things to do. Yeah. It's not easier.
I mean, somebody I heard somebody in the chat, they said that, nobody ever says anything bad about China. And I'm like, do you see American media? I don't think there's anything positive, and it's not that it's about necessarily trying to be positive or pro. I mean, I don't have any affinity or love for most governments in most nations. I feel like I'm kind of isolated doing my own thing, and at the top they're all striving for as much power and control and hegemony, and this is all just like Game of Thrones, just depending on which side that you end up being on, which house you're part of. Had some interesting questions over here on the Rockfin side for you that I wanted to ask. Denver asked, was saying it's the bank at the Center of Finance in Switzerland. In World Economic Forum's vision, IBS has a larger role. So I guess they were asking, like, as far as the World Economic Forum and China, what do you feel? How do you feel China fits into the World Economic Forum's like mission statements and goals and things like that?
So China has, as I stated on my last appearance on your show, China definitely benefited from the globalization that has started since 1980s. China is a benefactor. So China actually is perfectly fine with the system that even though it was a primarily U.S. dominated world system, but because China is profiting from it, China was fine to have business as usual. It's U.S. that's growing increasingly alarmed because U.S. is feeling like somehow China is hijacking its own system. the system that was designed to perpetuate
Yes.
U.S. hegemony, and now U.S. is like, wait a minute, they hacked our system to work for them, and so they're trying to put a stop to that. This is what's going on right now. U.S. is trying to pull out all stops to help the rise of China, and they feel it feels as though they must do something right now because they feel have a limited time window of 10 years, about 10 years. Because beyond the 10 years, the Chinese economy would have reached the escaping velocity. It will be larger than the U.S. economy. Even if U.S. in 2035 want to contain China, they would not be able to. Even if there's a will, there will be less capability. So that's why they're carrying out all these provocation regarding to Taiwan, because they felt like this is a time to do it. It's now or never, right? This is the thinking of the U.S. In military industrial complex. If we're gonna provoke China, if we're gonna start something, let's do it now rather than later when we will be in a weaker position. Now, from the China's perspective, time is on China's side. Every year China grows stronger. So
yes,
there's less incentive to start some shit right now with US, which could jeopardize their projected economic rise than just wait 10 years, when China is automatically.
Well, they could just literally let the U.S. just keep accruing more and more and more debt. And as you look at the political systems, they're starting to lose more and more legitimacy. You're having the third parties will start, eventually gaining power and start pushing out the major two parties, or at least giving them threats, throwing elections kind of out of their normal, it goes red, then goes blue, it goes red. It's going to start mixing things up. And if you look at America's policy that they've had since the beginning, it's about any nation which looks like it's going to break out of Western power hegemony. That nation needs to be stomped down and stopped. And so it doesn't matter if it's China, it doesn't matter if it's Russia, it doesn't matter. I mean, they did this with Japan. Japan's economy was flying, and it at the trajectory was going. By now, it would be one of the major hegemonies. But that was stopped.
Yeah, I remember 1990 when I first came to United States. Like back then, there was a real fear of Japan. There was a movie with Wesley Snipes and Sean Connery, The Rising Sun.
Rising Sun.
Yeah, it's all about how Japanese coming over. They're gonna take over. They're gonna take our companies. They're gonna take our companies. They're gonna take our women. They're gonna take over.
Remember Die Hard, Nakatomi Plaza, Nakatomi Towers.
Yeah, I mean, like this is, and also the darker side is the story of Vincent Chen. Vincent Chen was had it was a Chinese American. She went to have her bachelor party, and she was confronted by two Detroit laid off Detroit auto workers. They had an argument, and later these two father and son pair hunted Vincent Chen down with a baseball bat. And during the court proceedings, they claim that they thought Vincent Chen is Japanese, and because the Japanese competition, Detroit Big Five, they suffer a lot, and had a round of layoff, and they got laid off. So that was their defense. That was their core defense. They thought Vincent Chen is Japanese, so he was a legitimate target for their anger for losing their jobs.
But the crazy part is, really, it was NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Act, shipping a lot of jobs to Canada and Mexico more than anything. And so that hurt America far more than anything. And then, not to mention, American businessmen chose to go to China to try to exploit cheap labor.
It goes back to what Lenin said, right? There was a capitalist. They will sell you the ropes to hand them with, and Chinese position has always been, if you build it, they will come. They knew that. They built up their infrastructure, they built their ports, they built their power plants. They knew these capitalist multinationals would rush in to take advantage of China's infrastructure, China's cheaper labor force, and that's exactly what happened. So when like all U.S. politicians are blaming China, none of them are actually blaming the capitalism and the capitalist system that's always driving towards the lowest cost, highest margin, that's pushing this phenomena. But
Well,
because
I would say that, I mean, just to give a little defense for some, there are some people in America who are pushing back against the capitalists as a whole and feel like capitalism is an unchecked problem, which is wreaking havoc around the world. But yes, as a whole, the people who are at the top who are controlling most of the strings, yeah, they're letting capitalism run amok.
there are people in U.S. at grassroots level. They're starting
Mm-hmm.
to waking up, but the problem is our politicians. To be able to join either party to function in that system, you have to buy in automatically into the system. It's like even like the so-called progressives, the squats nowadays. They all buy into the kind of the U.S. must be an empire, like kind of they sprout the same kind of rhetoric that supports U.S. foreign policy abroad, which is sustaining the U.S. hegemony around the world, sustaining the U.S. empire and the U.S.-led capitalist system. But yeah, that's going a little bit too far afield.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the Nancy Pelosi visit, I'm just glad that China actually handled it a lot more rationally than I would have. Everybody was expecting World War III breaking out.
Well,
But
I completely had no belief that they were actually going to do anything.
I mean, like I didn't think World War III was going to break out, but I thought maybe China will at least send a fighter escort for Nancy Pelosi's planes into the Taiwan airspace. But that didn't even happen. They let her land peacefully. They let her leave, and then after she left, that's when China conducted this military exercise around Taiwan Island. It's actually, I think China actually played it brilliantly because without the Nancy Pelosi visit, if China just had carried out military exercise all around Taiwan Island, firing missiles, there will be like uproar in the international, in the Anglo media. People will be like, "Oh, China! Look at China, so aggressive!"
So in a way, Nancy Pelosi, are you saying that it's a possibility that Nancy Pelosi actually helped China be able to do this to encircle Taiwan to help
definitely.
corner the semi? Yeah, I mean, okay.
I mean,
yeah.
American politicians play checkers. The Chinese leaders, they play chess. I mean, it's they play Go. So it's quite different. Like they're not even on the same playing field here. And for Pelosi, all her concern is to have this photo op to show American public and some of her voter base, like, look, I stand tough against authoritarianism in China. I'm so brave. I stood up to the bad CCP, and that's it. That's her concern. I mean, she doesn't really care about potential impact or fallout on the people.
Oh yeah, she
Taiwan.
just cares about getting her checks. That's
exactly. And but the Chinese, they plan ahead. I mean, they probably, like the military exercise, it takes months to prepare. So they probably had a contingency plan, once they heard about Nancy Pelosi's potential visit, because Nancy Pelosi had made this announcement I think last time we were on, like she was already talking about it, but she had to postpone it because supposedly she got COVID, and then and so China probably had this all planned out. They're just waiting for her visit.
I think they postponed it so it could play a little bit later into the the primary season.
Yes. I think that's right, because in U.S. is all election centric. That's all they care about, is about winning the election.
When you're basically like, okay, you got 2-year cycles for some of these people, and or say 4 years, and they're 2 years in already worrying about trying to run for the next election. Everything's election focused, and you look at I'm not sure how the tenor and feeling on how some of the COVID procedures were as far as the people in China and how they felt about them. But I know in America, though they might act as if, oh no, the people were perfectly happy with this stuff. I think Biden really took a lot of negative points for the way they handled things. And then you look at, there were a lot of things he didn't do that he said he was going to do on race things, on minimum wage, on some of the stuff he said he was going to do supporting unions. I mean, across the board, student cancellation of student loan debt. There was a lot of things internally that he just did not do, and I think now they're trying to do their best to try to, what can we do to, like, I believe that the Democratic Party was in cahoots with the Republican Party in overturning Roe versus Wade to make it an election issue. I completely believe that they're like, okay, well, let's let this happen, and then we can get our voters back.
They need a boogeyman, right? Before it was Trump.
Yes, they need a boogeyman.
Before they have very conveniently they have Trump, and now it's like, okay, you guys expect us to actually do something? Well, okay, look, Roe versus Wade, right? So
Putin's not working anymore. Sorry to interrupt.
Exactly. I mean, this is everything in U.S. is kind of from politics to economy. Everything is short-term thinking. Like you in politics, everything is revolving around this elections. Every 2 years. In like in the corporate world, everything is around the quarterly reports. That you have to make it good, so our stocks will continue to go up, so the stock market wouldn't be impacted. So everything is organized. So who cares what happens 5-10 years from now, right? Because by 5-10 years from now, these politicians will be out of the office, and these people might not be serving in the same position anymore. So,
well, I honestly think a lot of these people are going to lose positions. I think it's going to be, I think, well, even though my personal belief and feeling is, even though they switch from red to blue, this is ultimately still controlled by the major banking interests. I mean, in the U.S., we've had over 12 recessions and depressions. Every single one of them were caused by the banking industry, and that's not very often talked about. And if you look at who are the countries that we're always trying to invade and have wars or conflicts or sanctions on, it's all the countries which we do not have, a federal banking system involved in.
And in a big recession or depression, guess who are the ones who actually get bailed out? The banks.
The banks. Exactly.
The banks. They're not bailing us out. The average American, we're not getting a bailout here. Mm-hmm. It's a big banks that's going to get a bailout.
Which I was looking at some ties to, because in some of my other research I've done, looking into the Tang Dynasty and how the Bank of East Asia, how they're tied into the Tang Dynasty. And then I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. What is it? The Qing Dynasty? Qing.
Oh, Qing Dynasty.
Qing, okay. Yeah. I don't know why I thought the Qing Dynasty was spelled differently. But looking back to the Opium Wars, like I've heard you talk about multiple times, they were really pushing back hard against the West. And then at the fall of the end of the Opium Wars and the fall of the Qing Dynasty, then you started seeing more Western influence banking coming out of Great Britain. Namely, one of them I found very interesting name, the Rothschilds, and then eventually the Rockefellers about 40 years after that. And so, I mean, going back into like 1890, 94, I believe.
Yeah, in fact, before the Opium War, the world's wealthiest private businessman was Chinese. So is a name named Ho Kwa. He was worth 5 times more than Nathan Rothschild in Britain. But after Opium War, of course, that all changed.
Mm-hmm. All the money changed.
Sucked out of China, and that's where a lot of the big British bank got their start. HSBC. It stands for Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corporation. Mm-hmm. Right? They got their start in the opium trade, financing all these opium smugglers. But if you go to their corporate page, their history is all scrubbed, whitewashed. They don't mention anything about their role in the opium trade anymore. But now they just HSBC. You probably a lot of few people even aware they're like old Hong Kong and Shanghai connection. That's where they made their first money.
Well,
The
I
first million.
tentatively knew about the banks being involved, but I didn't know which banks and which names. And like I ran across this video from another channel that I follow, and he was laying out some of this information. Now I got a video dropping probably later on today. Just gotta make sure do a little bit of editing, which I'll make sure to send it over to you. I love to hear your thoughts on some of it. And we'll talk off camera, but just the curiosity of some of these things, and I know you're going to know more about this than myself, but yeah, it was interesting when I found out that bank, the Hong Kong bank was what goes back to the damn Rockefellers. I'm like, what the hell?
HSBC. I mean, like a lot of Americans, they back then Standard Oil, they had a large stake in China because they were selling kerosenes to marketing kerosene as fuel in China. They were and at that time these American and British banks are also financing railroads building in China. So the deal is they're forcing the Qing government to grant railroad concessions, and so these Western banks will finance the building of a railroad in China, and then these Western banks and their Western companies will retain the rights of operating and the revenue from the railroad for like 99 years, and then they. In addition to the railroad, also about 10 kilometers on the either side of the railroad will belong to that company or the bank. And so they literally carving up a whole swath of China during the late 19th century. Yeah, so that's how that's how they operate. And like U.S. Navy actually had a Yangtze patrol. U.S. gunboats were patrolling up and down the Yangtze River, and its ostensible purpose is protect U.S. commercial interests, right? Wow. These are kind of commercial interests we're talking about, and they were there until 1950, until they finally got thrown out by Mao. So this is like a long historical perspective on kind of the U.S.-China relationship. The U.S. would much prefer the relationship to go back before like pre-communist time when U.S. corporation dominated the Chinese commercial landscape, and the fact that that's not happening today. That's the real sore point for these U.S. corporations.
Well, speaking of U.S. corporations and Western corporations, I got another question I want to run by you. It says, is the bund in Shanghai associated with Western banks?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like so what happened is after the Second Opium War, Shanghai was marked as one of the treaty ports, and part of Shanghai are carved out as foreign concessions. So there was American concession and British concession and the French concession and the Japanese concession, and the British and American concession were combined into one. They were called international settlements. So all the buildings, old buildings along the bond, they were built by these foreign capitalists, foreign banks, and this a lot of them financed by the opium dealers, and in Shanghai you ended up with all these much of the Shanghai became foreign concessions with a Chinese area. So Shanghai had a Chinatown. Essentially, Shanghai had a Chinatown, and the rest of the area are these foreign concessions, and they have restrictions on where Chinese can go. Like it
kind of sounds similar to how Hong Kong used to be.
Yes. Hong Kong is just outright colony. Yes, that's because in those international concessions, the Chinese law didn't apply. It was the law was administered by the British and the Americans. British actually they brought the Sikhs from India to act as police in their international settlements. So this is it's a lot of people describe this period of China as like a semi-colonial because it's not a full colony, but it's already halfway there. In places like Shanghai. definitely.
And then this is going to be sad that this is my reference point, but hey, people don't judge me out there. Most of mine back in the day, because my uncle was really big on kung fu flicks, and he would go to spend some time, after Vietnam and stuff like that, and that brought him deeper into just Asian culture as a whole, whether it was Chinese, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laos, Thai, the litany. And so he's always kind of had an affinity more for Asian culture more than anything. And so, long story short or short story long, the watching a lot of those movies is when I started to see a lot of the kind of the cultural clash between ancient China and the westernized coming in, and like with the Japan imperial army, how they were forcing a lot of things, and you saw a lot of Chinese are not permitted to go here. If you are Chinese and you come here, you need to be dressed a certain way. It kind of remind me a lot of what they did with Native Americans, how they start making them cut their hair or wear suits and all kind of different things like that, in forms of colonialism. And it was interesting how I just kind of thought it was movie stuff for the because we're talking 70s and 80s. I was much younger then, but as I got older, I realized no, that was the reason why it was such a theme in so many of these movies, because it was a real reference points to what was going on in that time period. Because a lot of those movies are dating back to the 30s and 40s and stuff like that.
Yeah, especially like a lot of the Bruce Lee films people might be familiar with, like there was
Chinese
a famous
Connection.
scene. There was a famous scene where Bruce Lee went to Shanghai and he saw the sign that hanging outside the park.
Yeah, he breaks the sign.
No dogs, no Chinese, and he got mad and he jumped up and did a flying kicks through the sign. So that's like a famous scene in the movie. So people actually did a research to see if the sign actually existed in history. So what they find is they didn't in the old Shanghai, colonial Shanghai, they didn't explicitly say no dogs, no Chinese, but there was a sign says this area is reserved for the Europeans, and also don't bring your dogs in here.
Well, it's kind of like in America in the South, you had some what they call sundown towns. Well, some where there was an explicit law literally on the books, and some you just knew after dark, So I mean, it's kind of interesting correlation how they do these things.
Yeah, it just play on words, because the old sign actually says this area is reserved for Europeans, and also says no dogs. I mean, it's pretty much So this I really have to go because
I know I saw it got a little bit later than we planned, and I know I don't want to get you in trouble with the missus, so I can have you back again. Carl, can you let everybody know? I believe I put it in the chat, but I'm not sure. But just let everybody know anyway where they can find you, your channel, your podcasts, your Twitter, all those things, real quick.
Sure. I have a channel on YouTube, so just my name, Carl Zot. Search for it. I put a lot of my free content from my podcast, Silk and Steel podcast, on my YouTube channel. You can also find me on Twitter. Again, my handle is just Carl Zot, the Carl spelled with a C. And for other people more interested into deep dives into Chinese history, I do have a podcast called the Silk and Steel podcast, which is hosted on the Patreon. I just go to Patreon page, search Silk. The first podcast is Silk and Steel podcast, where recently I have I'm doing a couple of series, one on chronological retelling of Chinese history from the beginning. Another one is a comprehensive dive into the Chinese Civil War, starting from the Manchurian campaign, and then just whatever that catch my interest about China history, culture, and politics. So
did you ever get that worked out with that co-host you were talking about, for you guys to both work on that? Because I haven't. I have to admit, I haven't been over to check out your work in a minute, because you know how it gets as a content creator, gets busy, and I run 3 channels myself. So I definitely want to get you on, so we're not just talking about current politics. I want to get you to break down some history for us also, because I think it's definitely needed over here in the West. And I'll just zip my mouth and just let you go. So I thank you so much for being on here. Make sure give my best to your family, and give a hug to the little guy.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for inviting me. Anytime, give me a shout out. I love to
Oh
talk.
yeah, I'll definitely hit you up. I'll make sure that it won't it won't be this long of a difference, and probably maybe have you sometime before the end of the month, because I got the feeling that there's going to be some more stuff that we're going to need to
Yeah,
talk about.
there's always
But
something.
but all
Something
right,
coming up.
oh yeah, I want to try to get you on with some of the guests from Africa, so we can talk
Oh,
some
that
of
would
the
be great.
China Africa stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna try
Yeah,
to coordinate that with you offline. And for you guys out in the chat, look forward to that. In the next couple of weeks or so, or next month or whatever. But it's coming.
yeah, that would be awesome. I look forward to
All
that.
right,
Well,
cool.
thanks
Thank you
again,
so much.
Marcus. Adios.
All righty, brother. Have a good one.